Right now in Tallahassee, two competing constitutional amendments are racing toward your November 2026 ballot, and they represent the single largest property tax restructuring Florida has seen in a generation. House Joint Resolution 205 wants every senior over 65 to pay zero non-school property taxes, regardless of wealth. Senate Joint Resolution 270 wants a $350,000 income cap and a 5-year residency rule. One of these will fundamentally change who pays for your roads, parks, and libraries. If you're under 65 or own rental property, your tax bill is about to explode, but only if the wrong version wins. Here's the breakdown the Miami Herald isn't giving you. Now look, before we dive into the details that are going to save you thousands of dollars and help you understand exactly what's coming to your ballot this November, I want to ask you something real quick. If you're tired of clicking on Florida news videos that promise you the truth, and then spend 10 minutes telling you absolutely nothing useful, if you're exhausted by channels that dance around the facts and never give you the actual legislative breakdown you need to make informed decisions about your money and your vote, then you're in the right place. I don't do fluff. I don't waste your time. I give you the committee votes, the bill language, the budget projections, and the political horse race in real time so you can stay ahead of what's happening in Tallahassee before it hits your mailbox. So if that sounds like the kind of intel you need, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Smash that like button. So this video gets in front of more Floridians who need to know this information. And let's get into the most important property tax fight of your lifetime. This is not another feel-good story about helping retirees age in place. This is a constitutional power struggle that will determine whether Florida becomes a state where wealth-based residency migration is directly subsidized by working families, or whether tax relief is actually targeted to those who need it to survive. The mainstream coverage is treating House Joint Resolution 205 and Senate Joint Resolution 270 as minor policy tweaks. But the structural difference between these bills represents a $4 billion per year question mark that every county commission in Florida is preparing for right now. If you own property in this state, whether you're 65 today or you're planning to be 65 in 10 years, you need to understand what these two bills do, how they're different, and which one is likely to appear on your ballot come November. Because the version that wins will determine whether you pay $0 in property taxes or whether you're stuck covering the bill for everyone else in your neighborhood. Let me break this down for you in plain language with no political spin. Let's start with the House. Plan. House Joint Resolution 205, sponsored by Representative Juan Carlos Porras. This is what I'm calling the universal exemption without limits. Here's what it does. If you are 65 years old or older and you own a homestead in Florida, you pay absolutely nothing on non-school property taxes. Now, let me be clear about what that means. Your property tax bill every year is split into two main buckets. One bucket goes to schools, the other bucket goes to everything else. Your county government, your city services, your roads, your parks, your libraries, your fire department, everything that's not education. That second bucket is typically 50 to 60% of your total property tax bill. Under House Joint Resolution 205, if you're 65 or older, that entire second bucket goes to zero. You pay nothing. Now that sounds incredible, and for seniors it absolutely is. But here's where it gets interesting. This bill has no income cap. It doesn't matter if you're living on $20,000 a year from Social Security, or if you're pulling in $20 million a year from investments and rental income. You get the exact same exemption. There's also no residency requirement. You could move to Florida today, buy a home tomorrow, turn 65 next month, and immediately qualify for this exemption. You don't have to prove you've been a Floridian for any minimum amount of time. You don't have to show that you've contributed to the state's infrastructure or tax base. You just have to be 65 and own a homestead. That's it. Now let me tell you what this means in practice. This is being marketed as a lifeline for seniors on fixed incomes, and for many of you watching this video, it absolutely would be. If you're living on Social Security and a modest pension, cutting your property tax bill in half overnight is life-changing. It means you can afford to stay in the home you've lived in for decades. It means you're not forced to sell because taxes keep climbing every year. I completely understand why this bill has widespread support among seniors, and I want to be clear that I'm not here to tell you that you don't deserve relief. But I am here to show you the structural design of this bill and what it's actually optimized for. Because when you create a universal benefit with no income screening and no residency gates, you're not just helping the senior who's struggling to pay their bills. You're also giving a massive tax break to every wealthy retiree who moves to Florida, specifically to take advantage of this exemption. A person who spent their entire career in New York or California, paid $0 into Florida's infrastructure, and then relocates here at age 64 to buy a $10 million estate in Palm Beach, gets the exact same benefit as someone who's been a Floridian their entire life and is barely scraping by. That's the political calculation embedded in House Joint Resolution 205. It's designed to attract high net worth retirees to Florida by making this state the most tax-advantaged destination in the entire country for wealthy seniors. And look, from a pure economic development standpoint, that's not necessarily a bad strategy. Wealthy retirees bring spending power, they support local businesses, they don't strain public schools because their kids are grown. But from a tax fairness standpoint, it raises a legitimate question. Do we want to subsidize people who don't need the help? Now let's flip over to the Senate plan, Senate Joint Resolution 270, sponsored by Senator Mac Bernard. This is what I'm calling the means-tested relief with residency gates. Here's how it works. You still get the full exemption on non-school property taxes if you're 65 or older, but now there are two major restrictions. First, your household income has to be below $350,000 per year. If you make more than that, you're excluded from the exemption entirely. Second, you must have owned and lived in your Florida home for at least 5 consecutive years before you qualify. So if you just moved here last year, you're waiting another 4 years before this benefit kicks in. Now let's put those numbers in perspective. The current low-income senior exemption in Florida has an income cap of around $37,000. So $350,000 is a massive expansion. This is not a narrow program designed only for the poorest seniors. This covers the vast majority of Florida retirees. According to most estimates, over 90% of seniors in Florida have household incomes below $350,000. So this isn't about excluding the middle class. It's about excluding the top earners, the people who genuinely do not need a tax break to afford their property taxes. But the 5-year residency requirement is where this gets really interesting, because this is a direct counter to what the Senate is calling benefit tourism. Florida has been the #1 state for domestic migration for 3 straight years. A huge portion of that influx is retirees cashing out of high-tax states and moving here. The Senate is saying if you want Florida's benefits, you need to prove you're committed to being a Floridian, not just someone exploiting the tax code. And from a budget perspective, this makes sense. If House Joint Resolution 205 passes, counties lose revenue immediately with no ramp-up period. If 10,000 wealthy retirees move to Florida next year, and all of them qualify for the exemption on day 1, that's a sudden massive hole in county budgets. The 5-year rule spreads that impact over time and gives local governments a chance to adjust. Now, here's where both of these bills get really controversial, and this is the part that most news coverage is completely ignoring. Buried in both House Joint Resolution 205 and Senate Joint Resolution 270 is identical language that prohibits local governments from reducing law enforcement budgets to offset the lost revenue from these senior exemptions. Let me say that again, because this is critically important. If either of these bills passes, county commissions and city councils are constitutionally forbidden from touching police funding to balance their budgets. Now, why does that matter? Because when seniors stop paying property taxes, that money doesn't just vanish into thin air. The county still needs to fund the same services. They still need to maintain roads, operate libraries, keep parks open, run transit systems, all of that. So, if seniors are exempt and police budgets are locked, where does the money come from? There are only 2 options. Option 1, you cut services. Fewer road repairs, shorter library hours, reduced park maintenance, scaled back transit routes. Option 2, you raise taxes on everyone else. And by everyone else, I mean working-age homeowners, landlords, and business owners. That's the zero-sum game embedded in both of these bills. The law enforcement mandate makes this a structural trap. County governments are being told you have to eat this revenue loss, you cannot touch police funding, and you have to figure out how to make the numbers work. So either quality of life declines for everyone or the tax burden shifts dramatically onto people under 65. And that brings us to what I'm calling the intergenerational tax shift, because this is the conversation nobody in Tallahassee wants to have out loud, but everyone is thinking about. When a Florida homeowner turns 65 under either of these plans, their non-school property tax obligation drops to zero. That lost revenue doesn't disappear. It gets redistributed across everyone else in the taxing district. Let me give you a concrete example so you understand the mechanics. Let's say you have a senior with a $400,000 homestead in Hillsborough County. Right now, that person is paying approximately $3,000 per year in non-school property taxes. If House Joint Resolution 205 passes, that $3,000 goes to zero. But Hillsborough County still needs that $3,000 to fund the services that person is using, the roads they drive on, the parks they visit, the fire department that protects their home. So what happens? The county either cuts services or raises the millage rate to collect that $3,000 from other taxpayers. If they raise the rate, the burden falls on everyone under 65. Your 40-year-old neighbor who just bought their first house is now paying more to cover the senior's share. Multiply that across 1.8 million seniors in Florida, and you're looking at a demographic tax transfer on a scale this state has never attempted before. And here's the political risk that both parties are nervous about, but nobody's saying publicly. Younger voters, especially millennials and Gen Z, already feel completely priced out of homeownership. They're watching housing costs skyrocket, insurance premiums double, and rent consume half their paycheck. Now you're telling them that when they finally manage to buy a home, they're going to be paying higher property taxes to subsidize retirees who, in many cases, have significantly more wealth than they do. That creates resentment. It creates a generational divide that turns into a political realignment. And frankly, it's already starting. You're seeing younger voters and progressive advocacy groups starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Why are we giving tax breaks to people who own multi-million-dollar homes? Why are we subsidizing snowbirds who just moved here last year? Why is a 30-year-old teacher paying more in property taxes than a 70-year-old who owns 3 rental properties? Those are not easy questions to answer, and they're the reason why this ballot fight in November is going to be so intense. So let's talk about the legislative horse race because you need to know which version is actually moving towards your ballot. As of mid-January 2026, House Joint Resolution 205 is advancing faster through committee assignments. It's already cleared 2 House committees with strong Republican support. Senate Joint Resolution 270 is moving more slowly, but it has vocal backing from county government associations and fiscal conservative groups who are arguing that uncapped exemptions are fiscally irresponsible. The governor has not publicly endorsed either version yet, which is unusual given how high-profile these bills are. Here's my rate on what's happening behind closed doors. The smart money is betting on a conference committee compromise where the residency requirement survives, but the income cap either gets raised significantly or gets eliminated altogether. Why? Because even the House understands that allowing day one exemptions for people who just moved to Florida invites catastrophic revenue loss. Every county commission in the state is lobbying against that provision. So the residency rule protects the budget, it spreads the cost over time, and it gives counties predictability. But the income cap is a much tougher sell politically because the moment you means test a benefit, you create a constituency of excluded voters who will organize against it. If the final bill keeps the $350,000 cap, every senior who makes more than that is going to vote no in November. And those are high-propensity voters with resources to fund opposition campaigns. So the compromise that makes the most political sense is a bill that says, you have to live here for 5 years before you qualify, but once you do, there's no income limit. That way, counties get budget protection and seniors get universal eligibility. If you want to predict what the final language looks like, watch which county lobbying groups shift their positions over the next 30 days. If the Florida Association of Counties starts softening on the income cap, it means a deal has been cut. But here's the thing that everyone needs to understand. Even if the legislature passes a compromise bill that both chambers support, even if the governor signs it, that doesn't mean it becomes law. Both House Joint Resolution 205 and Senate Joint Resolution 270 are proposed constitutional amendments. That means they require 60% voter approval in November 2026 to take effect. 60% is a very high bar. It's one of the highest thresholds in the entire country. And recent polling on property tax issues shows sharp divides along age and income lines. Seniors overwhelmingly support universal exemptions. Voters under 50 are split, with much higher opposition among renters and non-homeowners, who see no direct benefit and worry about service cuts. Getting to 60% when you have clear winners and losers is extremely difficult. So here's the scenario nobody's talking about publicly, but everyone in Tallahassee is modeling. What if both bills pass the legislature in some form, but the ballot language is so broad or so narrow that it alienates a critical voting bloc? If the final version keeps the no income cap language, progressive voters and younger demographics are going to organize a vote no campaign on the grounds that it's a giveaway to the wealthy. If the final version keeps the $350,000 cap, high-income seniors and their advocacy groups are going to do the same. The 60% rule means this isn't just a legislative fight. It's a voter persuasion war that starts the moment the ballot language is finalized. And that's going to be one of the most expensive, most contentious campaigns Florida has seen in years. Now let me tell you who's actually opposing these bills, because the coalition lineup is fascinating and completely counterintuitive. County commissioners, many of them Republicans, are quietly lobbying against both versions because they eliminate local revenue flexibility. Teachers' unions are opposed because non-school taxes fund libraries and parks that support education infrastructure. Affordable housing advocates are opposed because they're arguing that subsidizing wealthy retirees while younger families face a housing cost crisis is morally indefensible. And a growing faction of fiscal conservatives is opposed because uncapped entitlements are antithetical to limited government principles. This is not a clean partisan fight. You have progressive groups arguing that means testing is essential, which aligns them with fiscal hawks who normally oppose their entire agenda. You have pro-growth Republicans arguing that unlimited senior exemptions will make Florida uncompetitive for businesses that need functional infrastructure. The coalition math is absolutely chaotic, which makes the 60% threshold even harder to predict. If both sides overplay their hand, you could end up with a no coalition that's bigger than either yes faction. And don't forget, this vote is happening in November 2026, which is a midterm election year. Midterm turnout in Florida typically skews 10 to 15 points older than presidential election years. Seniors vote at rates above 70%. Voters under 35 vote at rates below 40%. If the ballot language is finalized by summer, both sides will have 4 months to mobilize, and the side that can drive turnout among their base wins. If House Joint Resolution 205 is the version on the ballot, senior advocacy groups are going to run the largest get-out-the-vote operation Florida has ever seen. They'll frame it as protecting retirees from government overreach, protecting people who built this state and deserve to age in dignity. If Senate Joint Resolution 270 is the version, the campaign will focus on fairness and sustainability, trying to pull younger voters and parents into the coalition by arguing that unlimited exemptions bankrupt counties and destroy services. The side that controls the narrative around fairness wins this fight. If seniors successfully frame this as we built this state and we deserve this benefit, they win. If younger voters successfully frame it as why should billionaires get tax breaks while we can't afford rent, they win. Whoever defines fairness defines the outcome. So here's the bottom line. One of these bills or a hybrid version negotiated in conference committee will be on your November 2026 ballot. If you're over 65, you have a direct financial incentive to support it regardless of the details. If you're under 65, you have a direct financial incentive to scrutinize the income cap and residency requirements because you are the funding backstop. The law enforcement mandate in both versions means your county cannot balance the budget by cutting police, so either services disappear or your taxes go up. This is not speculative. This is the mechanical outcome of the bill language as written. The question is not whether Florida will pass some form of senior property tax relief. The political momentum is overwhelming. The question is whether that relief will be universal or means-tested, and whether it will include residency protections that prevent benefit tourism. Those two variables determine whether this is a targeted lifeline for people who need it, or a demographic subsidy that accelerates tax inequality. Over the next 30 days, watch for 3 signals. First, if the House and Senate go to conference committee in February, pay close attention to which provisions survive. The residency requirement is the tell. If it stays in the final bill, the Senate won the negotiation. If it disappears, the House won. Second, watch the governor's public statements. If he endorses a version with no income cap, that's a signal that the political calculation favors universal benefits over fiscal sustainability. Third, watch county commission resolutions. If a majority of counties pass formal opposition statements, that creates political cover for legislators to vote no, even if their districts lean heavily senior. By late February, you'll know which version is advancing. By March, you'll know the ballot language. Between March and November, the campaign spending is going to be absolutely extraordinary. Expect tens of millions of dollars in advertising from both senior advocacy groups and opposition coalitions. Your vote in November will be one of the most economically consequential decisions Florida voters have made in a decade. If you want to track this in real time, the committee votes, the revenue projections, the ballot language changes, why every amendment, every shift in the legislative math, you're in the right place. I am covering every hearing, every negotiation, every move in this fight because this is the kind of information asymmetry that costs people money if they're not paying attention. Subscribe to this channel if you want the insider breakdown before it becomes mainstream news. No hype, no filler, just the legislative ground truth and the financial implications for your specific situation. My next video drops the moment the conference committee language is finalized, and I'll have a full analysis of what it means for your wallet, your vote, and your county's budget. Until then, stay sharp, stay informed, and make sure you understand exactly what you're voting on come November. This is the fight for Florida's fiscal future, and you deserve to know every detail before you step into that ballot box.